Welcome to the Your Love Ministries. Tell me a Bible story with Pam Baggett and me, Brenda Porch. Today we'll be reading from the book of Ruth. Now, this is the most quoted verses in the Bible that has been used in many, many weddings for the vows for the bride and the groom, where they pledged their lives together forever. But it wasn't originally written for that. It was originally between a young widow named Ruth to her mother in law. Now, when we think about mother in laws, we think bad things, but obviously these two ladies had a very close, loving relationship. Naomi was an Israelite who had moved to Moab with her husband because of the famine at home. And after some years, her husband had died. Then her two sons had died, leaving her alone with her two widowed daughters in law, Orpha and Ruth. I once heard that Oprah said her mother wanted to name her Orpha after this particular lady, and she mixed up some letters, and that's how we ended up with Oprah. I don't know if it's true or not, but anyway, back to the real reason we're here. So we have these three women without their men. And would that be a problem for them, Pam? I mean, wouldn't they just be able to go out and do whatever they were doing before the men died, get a job or whatever?
Even in the last century in this country, there were laws that restricted women from inheritance, from owning businesses, and and so on in some communities. And it's still that way in many third world countries. Back then, women had no rights. They had no identity. They had no opportunities. They needed a man to function in their own world. The two young widows could go back to their father's houses and hopefully find new husbands. But Naomi didn't have that option, and Ruth chose to stick with Naomi, so they were both adrift.
Wow. When Naomi decided to move back home, she told her daughter in laws to return to their families. And that makes sense because she's not going to be able to support them. Um, I think about what it would be like to be a woman in that day and time. And that would be very oppressive and scary to know that you are completely vulnerable because you don't have a man in your life. And so that makes sense that she would tell them to go back home to their fathers because she loved them. She wanted to make sure they were taken care of. But Orpha went. She was sad, but she went. But Ruth insisted on going with Naomi. And this is what she said. These are those verses I was just talking about. We find it in Ruth 1:16 and 17. Entreat me not to leave you or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts you and me. Wow. I mean, that is huge. Not only am I going to go with you, but I want to be with you. Whatever happens to you, I want to happen to me. And I literally want to die wherever you are. I just love those verses. And, before I really started studying the Bible, I just thought that they were, something from a man to a woman, but they're not. And that's a special bond that these two ladies had. So now Naomi's going to return to the way of what her family was like, but still she's agreeing to not just stay with her mother in law. She's going to a foreign country. She's not from that place. She's going to Bethlehem. But the part that always gets me is your God will be my God. That's huge. Talk to us about that.
Well, Moabites worshipped a god called Shemash. And the two women who went to Bethlehem at the beginning of barley harvest got there about that time. They're widows that didn't have options for making a living in those days. But the law of Moses had made provision for poor people. So in Leviticus 19, 9 to 10, I'm going to read this instruction. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not wholly reap the corners of your field, nor shall you gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not glean your vineyard, nor shall you gather every grape of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the stranger. I am the Lord your God.
Wow. So, what God is telling them is when you go to harvest that field, you on purpose leave some stuff behind so that others who don't own a field or have a way of supporting themselves can find something to eat. And I just love that God was taking care of those who needed it. He tells them how to harvest it, He tells them why they're doing. There's no questions asked. God said it, and that's how they're supposed to do it. And in Deuteronomy, the same instruction is repeated, but it says it is specifically for the fatherless, widows, and strangers. So Ruth set out to provide for herself and Naomi. She found herself working in a field that belonged to Boaz, who was a wealthy relative of Naomi's husband. So she does have family on, I guess, on her husband's side. Now, Pam, I have family I've never met, and you know how you go to those family reunions and people introduce themselves that you've never seen before, and you probably won't ever see them again. I once went to a reunion for my dad's side of the family, and I had this person walk up to me. I was probably in my 30s, early 40s, and he walked up to me and he said, "I know who you are. You look exactly like your dad." And I was like, "Oh, great. Thanks. I look like an old man." Now it says in the Bible that Ruth was gleaning. So, what does that mean to be gleaning?
Well, gleaning was the practice of collecting the remains of a harvest. After the major harvesting was done, there would still be some grain or fruit left, and gleaning meant going back for the leftovers. Jewish tradition was to deliberately leave some behind for the poor of the community to gather for their own use. And what I like about that too is that it was not just a handout. It wasn't just here, okay, here's your, we're going to give you this because we need to give some away or whatever. It was giving them a chance to come and work some for what they were going to have. They were allowed, that was going to be left for them. It was provision for them, but they would work and they would collect it and deal with it after that. So it was a saving of pride too, I think, for the poor. It not only gave them something to eat, but it kind of saved their pride.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. You know, was that, the old saying of you teach a man to fish,
Yes.
he'll have a fish for the rest of his life. But if you give him a fish, he's only got food for that day.
Right.
And so I like that idea is that the poor and the widows and all these people that needed the food, they could get it, but they had to work for it. And so Boaz, this gentleman comes back and he's checking on the harvest and he sees this young woman from Moab gleaming in the field. Now I wonder if physically she may have looked a little bit different. She wouldn't have had those Jewish features. I don't know, but I just wondered, whatever reason, he noticed this young woman, and he told, and so he told them. The workers told him. I'll get it out in a minute. The workers told him that she was uh, the woman that had come back with Naomi. Now he knew who Naomi was, I'm sure, and he spoke to her and he said not to go to any other field, that he was going to make sure that she was safe while working in his field. And he told her that she could get water from what his workers drew from the well. And this was her reaction. Pam, will you read that for us?
Okay. In Ruth 2:10-12. So she fell on her face, bowed down to the ground, and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your eyes that you should notice me, since I'm a foreigner?" And Boaz answered and said to her, "It's been fully reported to me, all that you've done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, and how you have left your father and your mother in the land of your birth, and have come to a people whom you do not know before. The Lord will repay your work, and a full reward will be given to you by the Lord your God, the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge."
Now, we don't know if Boaz saw something special in Ruth or he was just a really nice guy. And he kind of sounds like he's a nice guy, but I'm just wondering if maybe she was not too hard to look at. If she was pretty, and that would have helped too. But he was going to make sure that she had something to eat when he worked in his fields. He told his workers not to touch her, don't mess with her, to leave extra grain for her. And I think probably the fact that she was married to someone who was in his family, that I'm sure that didn't hurt. I'm sure that had to help too. And so Ruth goes home and, "Hi, how was your day?" And she tells her mother in law what had happened. And Naomi was excited because Boaz was a close relative. Now, in our culture, being a close relative, the only thing that means to me is I have to buy him a Christmas present. Um, what does it mean for that day and time?
Well, it would have been closer than a fourth cousin twice removed. Um, but I don't know exactly how it would have meant for them. It wouldn't have meant their closest family unit. It wouldn't have been like their mother's brother or things like that. I think it'd probably be a little distance from that, but we don't know. We don't have any specific. But it's a small town, and we think about it so strange that he would notice her, but um, it's a small town, so everybody pretty much knows everybody in Bethlehem. It's not a big place, and everybody knows the gossip of the time. So there was a lot of talk about Naomi being back and coming back with this Moabitess and all of this that's gone on. So everybody's talking. He's heard. He's gonna have known what was going on with her. But she may have been pretty, and I would suspect she probably was. Because he didn't like to look at her evidently and watching her. So yeah, that's something we can assume, but not really know. But as we said before, women didn't have any legal rights or identity except by a man in their lives. And Naomi had been gone a long time. She may have forgotten the connection to Boaz when she sent Ruth off to go gleaning, or not realized how wealthy he was. But his interest in helping Ruth was a real blessing. And Naomi may have felt relieved just that a male relative was willing to help them. That was a big deal.
Maybe she didn't even know that was his field. Like you said, she's been gone a long
When
time.
she first sent her out
That
there, she
might have
might
just been, a coincidence, I like to call it, that that
yeah,
was the closest field or the biggest field or something that drew her to that field to send her daughter-in-law there.
yeah.
We don't know.
Well, Ruth continued to work that field, even through the barley and wheat harvest. They were in different stages of the year. And Naomi decided it was time to take care of Ruth like a daughter, to seek security for her. And according to Ruth 3:2, she knew that Boaz would be at threshing floor for the winnowing process one night, and she told Ruth what to do to show Boaz she had an interest in him.
Wait a minute. Whoa. What does that mean? A winnowing process?
Oh, okay.
What's that?
The wheat was a seed that was covered with a husk. And so winnowing was the final step in separating the husk from the edible seed. So by that point, it would have been light enough to just blow away from the wheat itself. So that was all the process they were going through on the threshing floor, getting the separation of the two pieces of wheat and then blowing away the part that wasn't edible.
I see. All right. So now the story is going to get interesting because Naomi is going to teach Ruth how to catch a man. Now, in this day and time, the rules would be totally different, for what we teach our young daughters or daughter, widowed daughters-in-law about how to catch a man. But Naomi's going to teach Ruth how to do it in that culture and at that time. And so she's not going to dress her up and send her to the market and get her to flirt or any of that kind of stuff. But how would you catch a wealthy man in that day and time? I think that would be interesting. So she knows that Boaz is nice because she's spoken with, Ruth has spoken to him, Naomi has spoken to him, and Ruth has spoken to him. Keep getting these women confused. So she knows that he respects her, and he has, made provisions for her there. So if Ruth can catch the eye of this wealthy man, this wealthy kinsman, they might have a chance. Now, we don't know what's going to happen next unless you've read the story. So don't spoil it because this is going to get interesting. If you want to know how to catch a man in that day and time, you need to tune in next time for our next chapter of this amazing story. So what do you think, Pam?
I can't wait to get to Boaz's side of the story. It is a love story, and I want to hear his viewpoint on it. I've read this book so many times, and I've always seen it as Ruth's story. It's named after her anyway. But I've been thinking a lot about his part in it all. And he's one of those folks in the Bible that I'd love to meet.
He's, as we read about him, he truly is a quality person.
Yeah.
Often we find that people of great wealth become caught up in themselves and their power. And he had the power to do a lot of things in that culture. being a man and being wealthy. And yet, the more we study about him, the more we see what a humble, caring, seemingly gentle man he really is.
Absolutely. I think he describes a gentleman perfectly.
Yes, and I think we're going to find out more about Boaz. But as I like to do when we get to the end of the podcast, let's talk about how this story can relate to us in this century. So the first thing that came to my mind as I was thinking about it is that true family comes from the heart. You know, these two ladies weren't blood kin, but yet they had such a close relationship. Just like you said in Ruth 1 16 and 17, this is read at weddings as a vow and a promise to love someone who's your spouse. Now, if you're a Christian, the family of God is your family. All other Christians is your family. And we can have that kind of love for one another. And I think that's exciting to feel like if you weren't born into a family that loved you, you just never will have that. Well, that's not true. In the family of God, we have relationships where we truly love one another. I mean, you and I are a perfect example. We've only been in each other's presence once for a very brief time, and yet I feel like, you know, I've known you forever, and you're my sister, and I love that about the family of God. And when we love someone on the level that these two women loved each other, you're going to put that other person's needs above your own. And you're only going to be concerned about their needs. And hardships or real success will not separate us. It doesn't matter what life brings your way if you have that kind of love. And I also think about the bond that is formed with foster children and how my son-in-law was adopted and and the people that raised him is his family. And Pam, you've got some experience with that. Talk to us about that.
Well, after 30 years of parenting children, I have strong feelings about what really makes a family. People who say a foster or adoptive parent loves a child like their own make me want to lecture them about the fact that each of those children are my own. Even when I had to let a child go for whatever reason, they're still my children, and I pray for all 53 of them every day. Well, not by name every day. I pick a bunch of them, but I pray for all of them in general too.
If you
They're
can remember
also my
53
kids.
names, I was going to be really impressed.
I'm going to reel them off right now. That'd be crazy. But my youngest, my last one, turned 14 yesterday. So
Oh,
so I got to see pictures from her birthday. That doesn't happen often, but they're all my children, whether I can see them again or whether I know where they are or not. I still care for them the same way I did. And if they walked through the door, they'd be in my house and they'd be my child again. That's it.
you
But
know, I think there's a song that says, "Love is so much better when you give it away. You'll end up having more." And I think about that, and that's true. You know, giving our love to someone else wholeheartedly, as the saying goes, doesn't deplete from what the love we have for other people. It love just continues to grow. And so these women are just such a beautiful example of how bonds can be formed from foster child to foster parent or adopted child to adopted parent or sisters in Christ. You know, the Bible talks about David and Jonathan's heart being knit together, and they were the best of friends. They were family in their heart.
right.
And I think that's something that this story truly illustrates. All right, the next thing I noticed is that we're always being watched. Now, Boaz noticed this young girl and wanted to know more about her. And the workers were able to answer his questions. So they knew a little something about her too, and they had noticed her as well. She had many eyes on her and everything that she was doing. And guess what? We're being watched too. Every day, those of us who wear the name of Jesus Christ are setting an example, and by our lives, by what we do, by what we say, and we're showing the world what it should mean to be a Christian. Colossians 3:23 says, "Whatever you do, work heartily as if for the Lord and not for men." Whatever we do in our lives, we need to do it like we're doing it for God because we are, and not worry about what other people say. And I think this story illustrates that as well.
Ruth seems like a humble young woman to me. I don't have any reason to think that she was aware of the eyes on her. She was working hard and she was focused on that. But you're right that we are all teaching someone about God when we wear the name Christian, and how we speak and act will teach someone to glorify God or doubt him.
And that's kind of scary,
Yeah.
to think about having that kind of responsibility. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you are homebound or if you are in the public eye, 90, what do they call those trendsetters, fashion setters, whatever,
Influencers, yeah.
influencers. Yes, that's it. Oh, we're so modern. Um, People are watching you,
Yeah.
and your life has an influence on them. And so we need to be aware of that 24/7. We are wearing Jesus and we're showing that to the world. And I think you're right. I think we need to be careful. All right. And then the last thing I notice is that God will help you. We're going to find out. I think we talk about this in an upcoming thing that when Naomi came back home, she wanted her name changed to, I believe it was Mara,
Laura.
because meaning like bitterness or
Right.
grief or something like that. She had been through some tough times. I can't imagine being a widow, but I certainly can't imagine losing my husband and my children. I mean, she had been through some rough times, especially in that day and time where that meant she had no way to support herself.
Right.
But we have to remember death is not a punishment. It's just a transition and it's the next part of life. So God wasn't punishing these ladies. It was just life. It did leave them in a difficult position, but God had a plan for them. And it's so inspiring to me that Naomi did not allow those hardships to separate her from God, because that does affect some people that way. They blame God and they let it separate them from God. And so I really admire her for that. And I think that we need to follow that example as well, um, because she remained faithful to God no matter what. And I think we need to do that as well. All right. Well, our next podcast, we're going to talk about what happens next in this. I love that we call it a love story.
Oh,
And
yes.
that was your idea, Pam. I've always focused on the relationship of the two women, but
Well,
I've
it is
never
love story
really
too. It just
given
wasn't.
Boaz a whole lot of thought. But I think it's neat that, you wanted to say, hey, wait a minute, let's look at this guy. I think that's great.
Well, we
All
have two
right.
kinds of love. We have two kinds of love in this story. We have the intense love between these two women, and we have the romantic love. It's definitely a love story in more than one way.
I just think it's so neat. And ladies, if you're enjoying this story as much as I am, I pray that you will come back and join us for the next podcast, because we are going to finish, and it'll take, I think, 2 more sessions, but we're going to get the job done and you're going to hear the story. And we hope that you're enjoying the study with us as much as we are enjoying the study with you. Have a blessed day.